Welcome to Mineral Talks Live, the monthly live mineral webinar that brings you in-depth and in-person interviews with mineral people from around the world. Mineral Talks Live is brought to you by a joint effort among the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, the SMMP, and BlueCap Productions. Tune in on the first Wednesday of every month and stay connected to your mineral world. Now, broadcasting live from beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii, the land of aloha, ukuleles, and shakas, this is Mineral Talks Live. Hello, everyone. Today is April 6, 2022, and on behalf of Raquel, Eloise, and myself, we'd like to welcome you to Mineral Talks Live. Believe it or not, this is our 60th show, and we have an incredible interview for you today. But before we get to today's guest, let me tell you a bit about our show. Mineral Talks Live is the monthly mineral talk show where we sit down with people from all facets of the mineral world to learn more about what they do and who they are. I'm Brian Swoboda, the president of BlueCap Productions, and together with my partners, Dr. Raquel Alonso Perez from the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, and the soon-to-be birthday girl, Dr. Eloise Gaillou from the Society of Mineral Museum Professionals, also known as the SMMP, we want to thank you for tuning in today. Mineral Talks Live started in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, and throughout the life of this program, we've been incredibly grateful to all of our guests who have agreed to sit down and chat with us. These include some of the best curatrix, curators, collectors, dealers, miners, researchers, artists, and media people in the mineral world. For a complete list of all our past guests and links to those interviews, please visit the URL at the bottom of the screen. By now, I think it's obvious that we're having a great time producing this show, and we appreciate all of you who have been along for the ride. If you'd like to help us in keeping great episodes like today's interview coming, please go ahead and click the like or subscribe button below, and be sure to tell your friends about us. Now, one thing about this show that makes it unique is that this isn't just a conversation between me and our guests. All of you get to be part of the show by participating through the chat or the Q&A features, both of which are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat feature allows you to type messages to everyone watching the live show. And as we're all about community, when you first sign on, go ahead and fire off a hello to everyone telling us where you're from. Also, if you have general thoughts or comments during the show, this is where you can post them and interact with each other while we're talking. Usually, our guest and I aren't able to read those comments, but Raquel and Eloise will be very active in the chat area and may even interject a question or two to us during the interview. Now, if you have a question you're dying to ask our guest, but it's a bit off the topic of what we're discussing at the moment, feel free to type your question into the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to get to that at the end of the show. Finally, at about 40 minutes into the program, you may see a window pop up on the screen asking a bunch of questions for our Quick Fire 5 segment. This is where we get to see how well you know our guest, and yes, we play along too, as we're not even sure of all the answers to the questions we ask. Now, when it comes to people in the mineral world, occasionally there's a person who, despite having known them for years, I still find myself flattered that they know who I am, and because I look up to them so much. Today's guest is one of those people. He's a former professor at the University of Arizona, the former curator of the U of A Mineral Museum, the catalyst for the creation of the RRUFF Project, and one of the leading scientists on the Mars Curiosity rover. Ladies and gentlemen, a man who needs no introduction, who happens to love small, furry, ferocious animals, and has an unusual penchant for vegetables that start with the letter Q. It's my pleasure to welcome to our show, Dr. Bob Downs. Hey, Bob, how you doing, buddy?
Hello.
Well, now, Bob is being very relaxed today, so I'm tempted to kind of kick back and lie down too, so we're going to have a great time.
Yeah, my back is fried, so I'm just kind of horizontal is the best position for a long time for me.
Well, Bob, we're thrilled that you could be on the show, so thank you, even though I know it's a little bit physically uncomfortable. Absolutely appreciate you being here.
This is comfortable.
Okay, great. Well, then we're good to go. Hey, Bob, one thing I absolutely love to do on the show is to turn back the clock on our guests. I always find the origins of how people got into the mineral world fascinating. So today, you're on the hot seat. Tell us about your absolute first exposure to minerals, and what was that defining moment where you said, that's pretty darn cool?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a question I've thought about a lot, too, as a professor, because of students coming into mineralogy. I think that my story is so normal. It's just not unique at all. There's so many people I know that can tell you the same story. They started out as kids. They got excited with minerals, and that led to a career that involved crystals or minerals or atoms or something. Gene Myron is an example. Ed David, Ed David was when he was 8 years old, his uncle Bibby gave him a rock from Georgia. Gene Myron talks about around 8 years old in Ohio. Terry Wallace, Alex Schaus, Mark Feinglos, all these guys, Don Dole, Bill Pinch, they were kids. So for me, same thing, 8 years old. We were living in Cache Creek. My dad was working on the railroad, trying to take clean slides off of the railroad going through the Fraser Canyon. And there was a prospector lived up the hill. And if I'd hike up the hill to his house, he'd pull a rock out of this like 5-gallon pail that he had and give me the rock. And then we moved out to Ontario, and living in southern Ontario near Detroit, I mean, there's nothing there. It's just all glacial till. And I was the only kid with a mineral collection, so it was kind of special. And I just kept paying attention to my minerals and using it in school projects and stuff. Went to Kiwanis Camp, where my camp counselor studied geology, or maybe he just took a class in it, but he gave me his university textbook. So maybe I'm 10 or 11 then.
Okay.
And I started reading my first geology textbook. And I just really wanted to be, just to learn everything about it. And then in grade 8, I think, my class took a field trip. We took the train from Windsor up to Toronto and went to the Royal Ontario Museum. And that's the first time I saw a mineral museum. And I left that going, I want to be a mineralogist. And like I said, I don't know what a mineralogist is, but I heard the word and it sounded like someone who studies minerals. And I just wanted to do that. I had a buddy, he liked animals. So he ended up working for fisheries. And I was going to be the earth, and we were going to get a cabin up in the Northwest Territories and hunt and fish the rest of our lives. But that never happened. But, it's the thing you think about when you're young. And somewhere joined the mineral club in Windsor. I know I went on a few field trips. I don't remember them very well, but I remember going underground Detroit to the gypsum mines, and I got a whole pile of gypsum that I tried to carve into a chess set that never did work. Saw the the place in
a family show. Watch it, buddy.
Yep, the museum there in Detroit area. They're still there. Bart Cannon started at that place too. What was that? They had a really good display. Went to the Detroit show. I remember there where I saw, it was a tourmaline group, I think from Pala, on a dealers. And I asked them, I was 12, 11 at the time. And, how much? And they said $250. And I slapped down a $5 bill. I was so excited. I thought it was a great piece. They just laughed and laughed and laughed. I sure would like to know who they were, because I had no sense of the value of things. But from that, I went out to University of British Columbia, where I wanted to be start studying mineralogy, and took a geology class and hated it. It was... to me, it was just a lot of memorizing of words, Serac and medial terrain and all that stuff. And so I became a construction worker and would go back to school when jobs ended. Okay. And got a degree in mathematics finally when I was 30.
How did you switch from geology, mineralogy to mathematics? What was the catalyst that pushed you in that direction?
I just loved doing math. I liked the problems. It was like some people want to do crosswords. I liked solving problems, and it was a game all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but during those years, of construction, I lived up in Northwest Territories in the Yukon and near where the Panhandle of Alaska on the ocean, building a molybdenum mine, helicopter skied, just did it all, and started mineral collecting again. So friends like Dave Joyce and Rob Woodside and others were our friends in the Vancouver area, and we just hiked through the mountains. Bob Jackson taught me how to drill and blast at Spruce. I worked with Stan Espenshade and his dog Fungus. Yeah. And yeah, we collected pyrites and quartz, and I learned how to do that stuff. And Dave Joyce worked in explosives, so he could supply all the explosives we wanted. So we would wrap blasting cords around our shoulders and carry dynamite and 7-Eleven bags and had a drill slapped on my back. And we just climbed the mountains, drilling and blasting. And, it took $2. You got a free miner's permit and you could stake a claim and drill and blast all you wanted to. Whole different world than now. Totally. That was a lot of fun. And then, so I was doing that a lot. I worked for Joe Nagel at the University of British Columbia Mineral Museum. Okay. Joe was a really inspirational guy. He saw minerals as an art form. And I had never seen minerals as art. I thought they were beautiful, but I thought of them in terms of chemistry and crystals. And
well, you switched to crystallography from mathematics, right?
Well, so when I was finishing my degree in mathematics, my advisor said, "So what are you going to do?" And I don't know. And he said, "Well, what do you like?" And I said, "Well, I like minerals." He said, "Well, there's a lot of math in crystals." And I just didn't really know that. I didn't really even tie my group theory classes to point groups and space groups and stuff. And once he made that connection for me, that was obvious. So he gave me the best advice, and this advice I give to students looking for grad school is just find somebody who's doing something that excites you. Don't worry about what school they're at. Just find that person. You can usually find them by looking in journals like American Mineralogist or something. Mm-hmm. And then write them a letter and tell them what you're interested in. So I did that. I wrote, I think 5 people, and it ended up being Jerry Gibbs and his former students. So I got advice, talked with Frank Hawthorne. Somebody connected me with Frank Hawthorne. Frank asked me if I wanted to go to Manitoba, but I was born in Manitoba. There was no hope in hell that I would go back to Manitoba. And as I've gotten older, I really appreciate how difficult it was for Frank to entice people up there, because he had such a great program and was a fantastic scientist, but he was fighting the fact that it was colder than hell up there in Manitoba.
Sure.
But that's the way it is. So I ended up applying and getting accepted at Virginia Tech in minerals, and spent the summer working for Gary Ansell at the Geological Survey in Canada in Ottawa. That was a fantastic experience.
And that's Gary Ansell from the eponym for the mineral Gary Ansellite.
Yep. He was the mineralogist, ran the scientific collection there. Mm-hmm. When I got there, they gave me a stack of flats that kind of went from the floor to the ceiling, and there was all Mont Saint Hilaire material. And they said, "We want you to identify it." And I knew very little about any of that stuff. And I just, so I was taught how to do X-ray diffraction and started doing that. And one of the perks they gave me was every Thursday I got a Geological Survey of Canada truck, and I got to drive to Mont Saint Hilaire and collect. So it was primarily me, and Gilles Hanot was there, sometimes his wife, and just collected and farted around in Mont Saint Hilaire. It was a great summer. One time, story that I think is kind of cute was I came back with a mineral. I can't remember now if it was pink or blue, but it was just, maybe 3 millimeter crystals, and they were pretty little sprays, and they were, I'm going to say they were pink, but I could have the wrong color. And then when I brought them in, I was excited to Gary, I got this mineral. You got to see what it is. And I took it out to the microscope, and instead of being pink, it was blue. And what the hell's going on? And he's laughing at his desk. He knows what it is already, and I don't. And I'm trying to figure, what is this? So I bring it over to his desk, which is near the window. And when I get near the window, it changed color again, back to pink or whichever way it was. And he just laughed. And it ended up, it was ansolite, with the rare earth in it that was, one color under sunlight, another color under the incandescent lights. And I just never seen that before. No minerals like that in British Columbia. Right. But that was a lot of fun. That was a great summer. And then from there, I went to Virginia Tech to work with Jerry Gibbs. Mm-hmm. And I think it was October, November. By then, I looked at what I was doing, and it was like, man, I have found my calling. This is just the greatest thing ever. And to be honest, at that point, I started to really become fixated with the beauty of crystal structures. And that became, I liked crystal. I liked thinking about the atoms and the crystal structure and just the beauty of that symmetry more than I liked the holding a crystal in my hand and looking at it. I thought the atomic scale was just fantastic. And so I think my collecting slowed down a bit then. Okay. As the science, it just got really exciting for me. And then one of the years I was there as a student, Gibbs, my advisor, went to Australia for sabbatical, and he sent me to Carnegie, and I worked with Bob Hazen and Larry Finger, and started working on albite. So I was doing my first experiments, really, and that was really exciting. I really liked doing that, and high pressure work, that was very exciting. So when I graduated from Virginia Tech, I went back to Carnegie as a postdoc. Charlie Pruitt was the director, and he invited me there to be a postdoc. So that was sort of the end of my education there. But I will say, let me say one more shout out for field hockey at Virginia Tech. I was the varsity field hockey coach. And I just really liked that. And, we played University of North Carolina, University of Virginia, all those schools, Georgetown. That beating Georgetown at Georgetown was one of the greatest accomplishments. I really liked that. They were so quiet when the game was over. Right.
And you were constantly looking over your shoulder in the parking lot, no doubt.
But I really enjoyed being a student. That was just a lot of fun. And then the postdoc ended up even being better, because when you're postdoc, you could just do research, and you didn't have to take classes, you didn't get grades anymore. That was the postdoc was definitely the best time of my life. Being a professor is a lot harder.
It was just indulging in the passion. Well, now from Carnegie, you eventually made the move over to the University of Arizona, and Terry Wallace was the curator of the Mineral Museum at the time you arrived. You eventually took over the job once Terry left. Now, in January, this January of this year, we had a personal tour through the museum, now called the Alfie Norville Gem and Mineral Museum. But tell us about those early days of the museum at the University of Arizona and the people involved there.
Okay, so, when I was at Carnegie, Charlie Pruitt, he came up to me one day and said, "It's time to go." Mm-hmm. And I was like, so
pushed you out of the nest.
Yeah. And what I learned was I just, for some stupid reason, thought getting educated made it so you could do anything you want, anywhere you want. And that's not the case. Once you got a PhD, there's like 5 places in the world you can go to, and that's it. But I got 2 job offers, Michigan Tech and Arizona. And I was like, I don't know which one to do, back and forth. Michigan Tech was really exciting because I thought I could live in the snow, have a snowmobile and a big piece of property and run the museum there. That looked very enticing. But Tucson, primarily the mineral show, really made me want to go to Tucson. So I took the Tucson job, and my office was next to Terry's. So that was a really nice setup. Terry was sort of my mentor as a professor, and he was very well established professionally. One of the great geophysicists out there. Mm-hmm. And he loved minerals. And so he ran the Mineral Museum. Shirley Wetmore was in charge of it as far as the collection manager, the day-to-day stuff. So Terry didn't have to go there all that much. And they wanted, the university always wanted a full professor to be in charge of the museum. Okay. So even though I was the mineralogist, Terry stayed in charge until he left. He left and went to Los Alamos, became the director of Los Alamos. But I still wasn't full professor, so Spence Titley became the curator. And meanwhile, I'd started a lot of projects like the RRUFF Project, where I was investigating, characterizing a lot of mineral species. So the museum played a big role in what I was doing, but I wasn't officially part of it yet. And then once I became full professor, I think they asked me to be in charge of the museum within a couple months of that. Okay. When they gave it to me, it was like, okay, Bob, we'd like you to be in charge of the museum. We've laid all the staff off. There's no funding. The doors are locked, and everything's sitting on the shelves or in boxes. And let's see what you can do with it.
Good luck.
I was like, holy cow, yeah. So,
and so this was when it was still downstairs at the planetarium, right?
Yep, at Flandreau. Yeah.
At Flandreau,
and
right.
So Mark Candy, he was a local mineral collector, part-time mineral dealer, great personality, loved minerals. He was available, so I hired him as the collections manager. And he just had the right personality. We opened it up. People started coming in, and they would write letters to the president of the university telling them what a great experience it was there. We were getting 50,000 kids coming through a year. But the regular collectors, like the adult collectors, they found it a real problem to get to because, the kids, they got school buses, take them right to the door. But for the adults, you had to park several blocks away. It was difficult getting parking because it was in the middle of campus.
Right.
So once we got that thing back on its feet, and we started looking for other places to go to. And
now, Bob, unravel that for a little bit. Getting it back on its feet. I know there were a lot of things that you had to do to get that museum back on its feet. Why don't you share some of the things that you did?
Okay, so getting a place with no money, the doors closed, what to do about it. And so the first thing I thought about was a few years earlier, Terry, I think, instigated all this, is we got a gift of a lot of minerals from Damon Monnier. He had a lot of duplicates. So like Guerrero amethyst as an example, I think we had 80 Guerrero amethysts. And we just didn't need them. So I looked at this and I think we got to cull the collection a bit of the duplicates and use this money to build an endowment and get our funding that way, because the university just, I think in general, we're seeing this across the country. They just don't care about museums per se. They care about research and teaching. And there is some outreach component, but just to have a museum for the public to go, that's just, there's no, that's just doesn't seem to interest museums much. So the key was to try to get an endowment. And if we had an endowment, then I thought the museum would be successful. And I also really tied the RRUFF Project into the museum at that point, because that made a research component. And so a lot of people were interested in this model, and they started donating with the stipulation that the minerals could be sold and to help raise the endowment.
Great.
So Rob Levinsky really helped a lot. A lot of the mineral dealers. Rob was really front and center, and the museum board that I inherited was really important. And that Ed David was somebody I really connected with on the museum board. So for those who don't know Ed, he's the guy I had the man crush on. He he did a PhD in electrical engineering at, I believe, at MIT, and then went to Bell Labs, and within 5 years was the director. He was the director when the microelectronics were still being developed. His big thing was sound, hearing. So he said he was at a cocktail party. He was with a group of 3 others. There were 4 of them just talking away, and he just got bored with the conversation and started to realize he could eavesdrop on another conversation going on behind him. And then he started thinking, could I do that electronically? Could I get rid of the noise from one thing and just isolate something else? And in that moment, he became the father of excuse me.
My son will say you owe him $1 now.
Just the communication that brought in the internet and allowed us to have multiple signals going down a wire.
Like signal processing.
Signal processing, yes.
Yeah.
From there, he became science advisor to the President Nixon, lived in the White House. Nixon wanted to kill NASA at the time. He was looking for ways to fix his budget and get rid of things he didn't want. So he went to Ed and said, I want to get rid of NASA. And Ed talked him into not killing NASA. He said, what Ed told me was, all I did was tell him the budget was already allocated. You weren't going to save a dime by getting rid of NASA. And so then Ed went on, became president of Exxon. So, I mean, what a career. So he was on the museum board, and, I knew, for instance, selling minerals out of a mineral museum, I'm certain Raquel, or Elise are just cringing when I say that. But how do you
only
get
selling
money?
duplicates, right?
I was only selling duplicates, yeah. And culling, definitely keeping the best on display. And
the people who donated, they knew that was part of what you were going to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Ed David said to me, it's the first time I really heard it. He's just said, you got a good instinct, just go with it. Mm-hmm. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. And
words I try to live by.
I'd never heard that phrase until he said it. And man, it was so right. And he said, people will jump on board once you're successful. And that's what happened. The museum just started to grow. The endowment made the university pay attention. And then one moment that was very important, I got a phone call from a fellow. I'm so bad with names. Sorry for a moment. Mark
Lafont.
Mark Lafont. So Mark Lafont calls me up in my office one day and says, "Hi, I have a collection and an estate gift that I think I'd like to give it to University of Arizona. Would you be interested?" I was like, "Yeah." So he talked to me a bit, and he wanted a program that had an established mineralogist teaching classes, had to teach crystal systems, do macroscopic investigations of minerals, and we got a good relationship going on, and that estate gift really completely changed the way the university administration looked at the university after that, the administration changed how they looked at the museum after that, because this was real money. This is paying for a professor. It's an estate gift, so that means we don't get it until Mark dies, and may he live forever.
Mm-hmm.
But the greatest moment was just creating that, because the lawyers got involved. They saw it was real, and they started to pay attention, and we started looking for more donations started coming in then, and people like Gene Myron giving long-term donations of fantastic specimens and long-term loans, and putting on displays. And I used to have parties at my house. I would just put out an email to the MSA listserver and saying, if you're in Tucson, come to the house for a party. And those were pretty successful. And when I got to the museum, I changed that so that the parties ended up being at the museum, and we started having that open house and everybody coming in to see things.
Mm-hmm.
Herb Aboda doing the minerals of the Hindu Kush, the Pakistan and Afghanistan minerals,
sure,
really played a major role. That exhibit was 80% all his stuff, and then there was others. Levinsky put in stuff, and other people put in some things, but it was largely Herb. And somebody saw it on display at the museum, and they really liked it. And they called up Herb and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, and he sold it from the display. It stayed there till the end of the display, but
right,
man, donors and people who want to give things for loans really saw that as, oh, what an opportunity here, that you send things to the museum, and that really adds value to the collection.
Absolutely.
And that really made a real big influence on what happened at the museum. And the donations really started coming in then. Robbie McCarty, she's again being a state gift with her collection of miniatures for Arizona. Just fantastic collection.
I think that's still on exhibit at the current museum, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
Those are they're like permanent loans that will turn into estate gifts. And all those people, Mark and Robbie and so on, they pull pieces back, they trade them, they enhance, they send back again, and it's a living collection, and it's doing quite well. The models work really well, and so we needed to we needed a better facility, and so we just started looking around, and I think it was Alex Schaus introduced me to Alan Norville, and Alan, his wife ran the GJX show across the street from the Tucson Convention Center,
right,
and they were very interested in minerals and how, especially gemstones, and how it affected Tucson, especially the economy of Tucson. Alan's a big thinker, and so they offered us the corner of Congress and the freeway where the old there was an old restaurant there. Anyways, but that would have required raising about 50 million, and that was a really hard thing to chew. But Alan went and put in his notice to the government to say that he wanted to build a museum, and that's when the county realized that we were looking for something, and they had the downtown courthouse becoming vacant. So the county approached Joaquin Ruiz, the dean of the College of Science, and asked him if he would like the old courthouse for the facility. And so a few years later, that was something that was happening. And Alan decided that was a lot better facility than we could have built from scratch.
Absolutely.
Because it's iconic. It's the emblem that's on all the county trucks and everything. It's just really well known architecture. Yeah. So he donated money to get it started and gave sort of the founding millions of dollars. And so the university said, okay, we'll do it. And the county lent the university the money, and the county stayed in charge of all the development. They brought in the exhibits people to design it. And I laid out what I wanted. So at first we were just going to have 2 halls, but Alan wanted something bigger. So again, we got the 3rd hall. So we ended up having a one like called the Mineral Evolution Hall, then the Arizona Sonoran Environment room, and then a gem hall. The Mineral Evolution Hall was that was just what let me back up a bit. One of the things that Mark Lafont gave us were fossils. We didn't have fossils before at the museum. And I put in a couple of exhibits, and the kids just loved the fossils.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted, whatever we did at the new exhibit, I wanted it to have a larger, just something with a little more significant fossils, because of just how that excites the kids. And so the Mineral Evolution Hall was me thinking about a way to show the same minerals, galena and pyrites and epidotes and stuff like that,
mm-hmm.
to show them in a new context, that be able to add fossils to it, because that's part of the story of the evolution of minerals, the evolution of life, the evolution of the planet.
Uh-huh.
And it just provided a whole new way to show the minerals. And so Bob Hazen, again, my postdoc advisor and life friend is what I would call Bob. We had 2008, we did a paper with 6 others, I think, and paper was simply called Mineral Evolution. It was the idea of looking at minerals as a function of time rather than in terms of its chemistry or just locality, as is typical in museums, and just how the earth evolved. In the beginning, there was like 50 or 60 mineral species, and now we have close to 6,000. How did that happen? And so it's telling that story. And I really like how that hall turned out. And then from there, wanted a Arizona. So when we were in Flandreau, the cases were really laid out with Damon Monnier cases showing the things that he had donated, and the rest of it was primarily chemistry. Here were the zinc minerals, here were the iron minerals, that sort of stuff. And slowly, when I was there, I started building an aisle that just had all Arizona localities, and I really wanted to have an Arizona room. So in the new museum, we dedicated Arizona and Mexico. And I didn't want it to start with just white man. I wanted, what happened in the past. And so one of the grad students in my department had worked on, what's the blue mineral? Silver and turquoise. Had worked on turquoise, and she had done ICP-MS, where she analyzed the trace elements in it. And from those trace elements, you got a fingerprint of the localities that they came from. And she mapped out all the turquoise localities, the indigenous ones, the ones that were in the calendar stone and the Aztec sun, and just all this stuff, and really told a story of the early trading of minerals and the trade routes of the indigenous people in Southwest United States and Mexico and into South America. And so we opened the Arizona Hall with that. And then what brought people to Arizona what brought the Europeans to Arizona was gold and silver. And then that turned into copper. And copper really had the influence because of the same time that the electrification of the U.S. was going on. And Michigan just didn't have enough copper to supply the infrastructure for the United States. And that came out of Arizona, and that turned Arizona into a state. So Arizona the modern Arizona was developed because of copper industry. And the University of Arizona was started to supply the academic institutions to train for the copper industry at the beginning, especially Bisbee and so on. And so there's such a story with that. So that's how that Arizona Hall started. And then got Peter McGaw to do the Mexico cases. He loves Mexico, collecting minerals in Mexico. We're just naming a mineral after him now, Peter McGaw. And just approved. And anyway, so he's got, he looked after that. And then, so there's the story of the mines. There's the story of wolfenite. So Alex Schaus with some school kids talked the Arizona government to making wolfenite into the state mineral. So we had a nice exhibit on wolfenite that tells a story. And I also wanted to, as time goes by, mineral collecting in Arizona became a big thing. So we got cases on just like, what do you need to become a mineral collector? Advertising the clubs, an outreach area of the Arizona Hall that's just for local collectors to exhibit in, kids. So in the science fair around Tucson, lots of kids put in mineral exhibits. My kids did one where they studied the mineralogy of the saguaro cactus, and it ends up there's oxalate crystals, wettolite and wheelite are found inside saguaro cactuses.
Wow.
And the TGMS gives them a scholarship for winning these things. So we decided that we would put their exhibits on display at the museum. And then minerals in Arizona have really turned into high-tech stuff, especially studying them at the universities, places like Intel with their silicon labs and so on. And so the Arizona Hall finishes with exploration of minerals on OSIRIS-REx mission, going to the asteroid belt, Mars, the moon, and so on. So that's sort of the story of the Arizona Hall. And then the Gem Hall, I don't know much about gems. So Elise Mizorowski,
right.
She was at GIA, really knew her gems really well. She did the San Diego, a big all the glitters exhibit there. And
I remember that. Yeah.
Her husband was a director of movies. He did the movie Tombstone with Val Kilmer and those guys. And they really liked the piece of land that they did the filming on. So they bought it and they retired and moved out there. So with her being here and really liking her a lot, I asked her if she would design the Gem Hall. So she and Eric Fritz, Eric had come here from Gem A and decided to live in Tucson, and he introduced the museum to gemstones and got Shelley Sargent to exhibit. I think our first gem exhibit was birthstones, and we just sort of introduced gemstones to the museum, and then with Alan Norville's interest through his wife, we needed to have a strong gem component. So Eric and Elise just kind of designed the Gem Hall to whatever it is that they liked, and it's a fantastic Gem Hall. And we made a long-term agreement with Somewhere in the Rainbow. so that they will exhibit their things there as long as they think the museum's going in the right path. And I think it is. And that there's lots of turnover there, so that you see new exhibits changing all the time. They have an exhibit right now with this carpet. It's a small carpet, like 3 feet across, made out of, all the fibers are gold, and there's like 38,000 gemstones in it. It weighs like 30 kilos. It's just there for a while. It's an incredible exhibit. And
I remember that was placed during the Tucson show this year, and Shelley was posting about that, and the museum was posting about that. It's an incredible thing to see. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they've really turned this museum into something that's vibrant and living and changes all the time, so people can go there and see something different. And there's a research hall downstairs, GIA funded or gave all the equipment, microscopes, desks, all sorts of stuff, so that there can be an outreach teaching academics of minerals and so on.
It's absolutely incredible. And for the viewers who are not familiar with this, if you go back into BlueCap Productions Mineral Talks Live playlist, you can watch our January show where Eric Fritz takes us through and shows us this entire museum, and it's absolutely fantastic. I love getting this backstory from you, Bob, from where it started, nearly shuttered and decrepit in the basement of the Flandreau Center, all the way to where it is today. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. Now, Bob, and I couldn't
handle that anymore. It was just too much day-to-day work, and I was being a professor, and I was doing my research, and so I reached a point with COVID starting up, and I just decided to retire. But I've kept my research labs. I'm a professor emeritus now. I still have my lab, still have my office. I'm just not teaching anymore, and I'm not at the museum any longer. And I'm working on Mars and RRUFF Project are my things that I work on.
Bob, that's a great segue. These are kind of two of the most, to me, exciting accomplishments in your career, both the RRUFF Project and what you've been doing on Mars. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, about each one? Maybe start with RRUFF, because you've mentioned it a couple times.
Yeah, RRUFF started first. Here, give me a second.
Yeah. And Raquel, maybe you can go ahead and fire off the quick fire 5 questions. Bob, you may see a window come up on your screen. You can just go ahead and close it. Don't bother reading it. You can take your glasses off. It's okay.
Margarita or whiskey.
Yeah, no.
Whiskey.
No. You're not supposed to read this, buddy.
Yeah.
We're going to see how well the audience can answer these questions. I'll ask you all these questions at the end of the show.
Number 2, ramen or udon?
Hey.
Just know that I did a sabbatical in Japan. So,
perfect.
Yes, that will play a negative role in your choice there.
Okay. So let's hear about the RRUFF Project.
So, so when I first was going to U of A, I was studying high pressure minerals. So you put crystals inside a diamond cell, you squeeze the diamonds together, and you generate pressure, and then you study the crystal as the diamonds are squeezing it, and you could mimic the interior of the planet or things like that. And that's what I was doing. And you had to measure pressure. And so a guy, Dave Mao at the Geophysical Lab, had told me that I should get a Raman instrument to do that with, because it was easy to operate. I could measure the pressure in my diamond cell. And by the way, you can identify minerals with the Raman instrument. Well, that was kind of interesting. I read the literature, and all I saw was literature saying you cannot identify minerals with Raman. That is completely wrong, but there were a lot of papers saying that you could not do that. But I had a student at the time, Aaron Celestian, who's now at
LA County
Museum. Yeah. So Aaron was an undergraduate at the time, and he was working in my lab, and we were just taking things out of the Mineral Museum and just shooting them with the Raman and realizing, they all had their own signature, and we could identify what they were. I did a real stupid thing. I made a collection of Raman spectra of gemstones. Gemstones are just, they're so perfect. They produce the greatest signals that you could get on a mineral. They're very sharp. You can have large crystals that are so homogeneous and so perfect that they're the best material to study. And so I had a collection of those, and I put a email around the department. I said, why don't you bring your gemstones up to the lab? And we got this new way of identifying things that's non-destructive and only take a second to identify your gemstones. So I had about 30 people respond to that. And oh, what a disaster that was. It was just terrible. The reason is nobody gets good news. They come up there and you got your engagement ring with your 3-carat diamond on there, and I'm telling them that it's cubic zirconia, and there's one person of the 30 thought they had a amethyst, and it ended up being a sapphire. But outside of that, it either was what they thought it was or it was bad news.
Oh my God.
So that wasn't such a good idea to do. But anywho, I started developing this, and the dean introduced me to a fellow, Bonner Denton, over in chemistry. And Bonner was designing the next generation of Raman instruments. And the way it worked there is that he'd have a student who was involved in doing the work, and that became the student's PhD thesis. And then they had to do some research on the instrument. So the student, Carolyn Pommier, she designed the instrument that I use in my lab, that whose name escapes me, the Omega. She designed that as her PhD project, and they sold it to Thermo, that really made like the first real good black box Raman instrument. And so we became friends, and from that, a company called United Technologies, they got a contract from the Jet Propulsion Lab to take the Raman instrument, which was really, it was like on a 3x5 foot table, a big instrument, and turn that into something that's a little bit bigger than a cell phone that could go to Mars. So I became part of that project, and we primarily with their engineers designed something that was compact and small, and that's what's flying on Perseverance right now. Okay. On Mars. And then so I was doing that, and then I had a student, Marcus Riglieri. He was at the TGMS show, and he helped somebody setting up their case for display. Bill Larson had said, Marcus, go over and help this guy. So it was somebody that Bill knew well. And for whatever reason, they finished the case, and Marcus brought him back to the lab, and they were walking around the lab touring the equipment. And I happened to walk in the lab, and I was listening to them talk, and the guy clearly knew stuff. He knew his physics, and I didn't think Marcus was answering some of the questions as well as he could have. And so I started interjecting, and this guy knew his stuff, and he pulled this crystal out of his pocket, and he shows to me, he says, could you run this on your x-ray machine? And it was a big crystal, like, an inch across, let's say, I don't know. And it was like, yeah, I could run that on the instrument. It would take, maybe a week to run, because my instruments were set up to do high pressure work. And he said, well, how could you do it faster? And I said, well, there's a new generation of equipment out there with CCDs and stuff, and I'll bet you it'd only take a couple hours with that thing. In reality, it'd take about 10 minutes on the new instruments, but at the time, I didn't really know that. I just knew it'd go a lot faster. And he said, well, if I bought you one of those, would you give me, half a day a month on it? And I was like, yeah, who are you? And so I hadn't really been introduced to him yet. So this ended up being Mike Scott, who was the founding president of Apple Computers. He got his degree at Caltech. This guy knew his physics and his science, and sure, and loved gemstones. And so we went out for lunch, and he wrote me a check, wrote check to the university to outfit the whole lab, and bought new diffractometers, new Raman instruments, just outfitted, just fantastic thing that he did. He never really did ask me to analyze any of his samples. And then down the road, maybe a year later, our design for the Raman instrument was accepted. That work was done, and I wrote a proposal to NASA to build a database, because I figured you're going to fly to Mars, you need to know what the data is going to look like. You don't want to be shooting something for the first time and having to come back home going, "Hey, Homer, what the hell is this?" And you got to have a database. So I wrote a proposal to put in the database, and I asked for $1 million a year. And but the whole funding cycle was for like $100,000 a year. So I didn't get funded. It was too ambitious. But Mike saw that. I sent a copy of the proposal to Mike, telling him, just showing him what I was doing with his equipment.
Right.
And he just said, this is such a significant idea. If NASA doesn't fund it, I'll fund it. So NASA didn't fund it, and he promised me 3 years of funding, and he gave me 4. And it was significant funding in the order of $1 million a year. At our peak, we had 35 students, undergrads, working in the lab. They were doing X-ray, they were doing Raman, they were doing microprobe, they were photographing, characterizing, data entry. It was just a vibrant, fantastic thing going on. Hessian Young, Professor Young came. He had a joint professorship at Caltech and USC, working at JPL. He and I were postdocs together at the Geophysical Lab. He went to Miami, didn't like the job there, and as a professor, so he came to Arizona to work on the RRUFF project there. And he really, he's the world's best as far as I'm concerned. Could analyze the samples, and really our research really took off at that point. So we weren't just characterizing olivines and pyroxenes, but we were looking at things that we didn't know what they were, and they were new minerals and so on. And so the project really took a turn there. And then after NASA continued to fund it, industry, what's the gold company out of Denver? Newmont.
Newmont Gold, okay.
Newmont, they funded it. Phelps Dodge funded. So we had money coming from all sorts of different sources, but the minerals got harder and harder. I think we've probably X-rayed 70% of the known minerals. And at some point, they just get really hard to do because they aren't big crystals anymore, and it's harder for the undergrads to work on them. So that has slowed down. But Mike's stipulation with the money was that we had to make this thing free for everybody to use. I think the idea is eventually this thing is going to get to be the size of an iPhone. It's going to be inserted in an iPhone, and you just need a laser to come out. You shoot the thing with your iPhone. The signal will pop inside, go on the screen, get solved, and you'll be able to identify it. You can identify paint and plastics and sulfates in wine, and just the tarnish on wood. We went through plants on campus. With Raman, you can identify the different plants just by shooting their leaves.
Sure.
So it was an incredible thing. And our job that we saw was to do the minerals. And
everybody is using the database now. I think you told me 950 million hits.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now. It's really, and they come from all over. There's students all over the world. There's the nuclear proliferation people are using it in Iran just to check on the things that they're finding there. Homeland Security called me up one day, and they had something they couldn't figure out, and they sent me the pattern to ask me to figure out what it was. It was like cerussite or something. It was something to do with lead corroding away. But it was just it really became something, and I feel like we, with Mike really saw things different. At the university, we studied one mineral at a time, and he looked at it and said, "No, you make an assembly line and you just do them all." And
he was looking at it from the 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, and I think we're the first real significant scientific collection out there, and we're still really important, and it's still continuing. So that was sort of the RRUFF project, and along the way, I guess, Mike asked me a really simple question, and that was, tell me what the list of minerals are. How many do we need to do? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, so I just contacted the IMA. Ian Parson was the president at the time. So it's the International Mineralogical Association. They named the minerals. So I contacted Ian. I said, Ian, do you guys have a list of the minerals? And he goes, got me in touch with the guys in the Nomenclature Commission, and we had a conversation, but they basically say that's not our problem. What we do is we look at the names of the new minerals, not the ones that have already been known. So gold and diamond, for instance, were not of interest to the IMA Nomenclature Commission because they only looked at things from 1949 on. And so it's like, well, this is a real problem. And so after discussions with Ian Parsons, he asked me to join the executive board of IMA. And my secret mission was to get the Nomenclature Commission to embrace looking to the names and the characterization of all the minerals. And so really important in that was, what's his name now from Australia? Pete Williams. Mm-hmm. Pete really understood the big picture, and he embraced it. And IMA now, they have, they're stretched to the limit in the amount of work they have, and they don't need to add more work to their load, but they did. And Marco Pissarro, is it Marco? Which I think is in charge of the old mineral names and getting those cleaned up. And there's now a list of all the known minerals, and the RRUFF Project took on the outreach component for IMA. So our job is to make what the Nomenclature Commission developed and put that out there for people to access and be able to use. And so in today's world, that's what the RRUFF Project is doing. It's the outreach for the IMA, and it's looking after primarily the Raman X-ray diffraction chemistry database of all the minerals.
Well, that's incredible. But RRUFF also got you involved with Mars. Now, tell us about the Curiosity probe. We had, Liz Rampy on the show back in 2021, and so we got a real good view of what it's doing. But I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah. So one day I got a phone call from somebody asking me if I would be on the what do they call it? Just a review board for NASA with the ChemMin diffractometer that was going to go up on the Curiosity rover. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really know much about NASA, especially the review boards. I'd had the proposal that didn't get funded, and anyways, so I accepted that and got on the review board with that, and that went really well. And I got to meet guys, and later on, a year or two down the road, they approached me and said, Bob, you know a lot about X-ray diffraction, and you probably X-rayed more minerals than anybody on the planet. because I think we've done, like I say, about 4,500 species. So would you like to join the team? And I was like, yes. And so RRUFF supplies the data. We get all the crystal structure data that we use for the analysis of the diffraction patterns that come from Mars. And I just became part of this team of fantastic scientists. And they're great guys. They know all aspects. There's people who know soils, and people know amorphous compounds, and people that understand paragenesis and where things come from. And as a team, we got this diffractometer up there, and it sends us the signal, and we analyze it and figure out what's going on up there. And it's just it's been the most exciting science of my life, because everything is unknown, and the camaraderie is beyond belief. It's we all, I think we love each other, and we really love working on this project. And it's new, it's exciting. It's diffraction on another planet. We got to go to the 100-year anniversary of X-rays at the United Nations in Paris, and we're able to present that we were doing X-ray diffraction on another planet. That is just unbelievable.
That's awesome.
And part of that was making the diffractometer from the size of a fridge to making it the size of a bread box, so it could fly. A lot like what the Raman was, making the Raman from a 3 by 5 foot table into something that can almost fit on a cell phone.
Now, as
so
Liz
that
explained
is
to
still
us,
going on.
As Liz explained to us, the mission of the Curiosity wasn't to find life on Mars, but to find whether or not the conditions ever existed on Mars where life might have been able to exist. And when we were talking the other day, you were telling me about the silica that you had found on Mars that was very unexpected. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we went to a spot that was kind of bright, and bright white, if you will, different color than the rest of the ground, and we analyzed that stuff, and it ended up being tridymite and cristobalite. And I remember Jiba Ganguly had told me, there is no chance in hell that you're going to find silica on Mars, because it's basalt planet and there's just not going to be any silica there. And to get a spot where the major minerals were tridymite and cristobalite, which are two fairly uncommon silica minerals, primarily formed from evolved volcanoes that they're not basalts anymore. They're shooting out just silica. Especially, for instance, you see a lot of that southeast of Mexico City, just in the debris there. So we found this stuff there, and it was just completely unexpected. And that single event, I think, has to rewrite our understanding of Mars, because it is not just a basalt planet. There's a lot of evolution going on there. And the story, when you look in 1 billion years, 3 billion years ago, there's only one thing that holds the memory of those events, and those are the minerals.
The minerals.
So that's why we analyze the minerals, figure out what they are, try to estimate their chemistries, and so on.
So it being, you finding silica there basically told you that the planet didn't evolve as quickly, or didn't die out as quickly as everyone had assumed that it had. It had a much longer evolution.
Yeah, the rock, the interior, was able to concentrate different elements. It had enough time to do that. It wasn't just pile of volcanoes exploded and that was the end of the planet. And and there were clays. We found lots of clays. I mean, right away we found the riverbeds and all the evidence, the mudstones, that there were lakes that lasted a long time, in the order of millions of years, not just a few thousand years.
And so what happened? How come life didn't evolve on Mars as we saw it evolve on Earth?
I don't know. Maybe it went too quickly. certainly the early years for life on Earth, they were probably duplicated on Mars. So either it's just really small things that we just don't have the equipment to see, very small biological materials, or it just wasn't there. One thing we do see on Mars is a lot of amorphous material, sometimes 30-40% of the soil. On Earth, that's like 3%. So why is there so much amorphous material on Earth? And my own pet theory for that is that amorphous materials, being disordered, they're not crystalline. That gives you a high energy food source for bacteria and so on. So on Earth, the amorphous materials get eaten first by the microbial activities. But perhaps on Mars, that didn't exist, and therefore the amorphous materials continued to weren't eaten up. So they're there and they have a large component now. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. So was there ever life? I don't know. I don't think so, is my opinion, but I'm allowed to be wrong.
But there was an atmosphere there at one point that no longer exists.
Yes. And that atmosphere, there had to be, because if you had lakes and oceans, then an atmosphere kept that stuff down on the planet, in the planet. But slowly Mars is smaller than Earth. So lighter elements just float away like a helium balloon and off they go. And even now, Mars, as it circles around the sun, is leaving a trail of atmosphere behind it as it bleeds off. It just can't hold on to the atmosphere. So it'd be very hard to put an atmosphere on Mars that would stay. We can make dome cities maybe, but we're not going to be able to put atmosphere on Mars.
If Mars were larger, say the size of Earth, better chance of potentially it evolving life like our planet did?
If it was larger, probably. The only other difference really from Mars and Earth would be, I just have to get up and walk around a bit, would be that is just that it's further away from the sun. But it had all the opportunities.
Interesting.
So there's,
Yeah. So you said that there's little chance of us putting an atmosphere. Do you think we would be able to have a base on Mars? Or
sure. Like you can have a base on the moon. There's even less of an atmosphere. The moon is more hostile than Mars. The moon is just a lot closer and less gravity, so it'd be easier to take off from. So we have another proposal in that we'll know in a few months, and that's Elon Musk is going to catapult a lander up there on Mars. We're going to go to I just don't know how to say this word, the Graniason domes, if I said that right, and find out what they're made out of. And we're going to land a diffractometer on there, scoop up the dirt, analyze it, and we're also going to be looking to see if there's any material to build a moon station with. Those moon stations are going to be 3D printed. And so you're going to use the dirt from wherever you are. You got to have the right material. We'll probably have to shoot something down there to be like the glue, if you will, the epoxy.
Sure.
But then there'll be robots that'll build the station. We just have to find the right place for that. So hopefully, my fingers are crossed that we'll know that in a few months.
Wow. Moon Station Alpha, Space 1999 is coming true.
And more mineralogy.
Bob, we're a little bit past our hour mark, but that's what I expected. We're going to move to the quick fire 5 questions now, and then right afterwards we're going to do Q&A, see if any of the viewers out there have questions.
Can I just have 1 minute to myself?
Absolutely.
I need a moment. Thanks.
Okay.
Can't.
So we're going to pause for a moment here as Bob runs off and does his little errand. But yeah, I mean, that's very exciting. Now, when Bob and I were talking, he was describing the probability or the intelligence or the right choice of having the moon base. And he alluded to it here, where a lot less energy needed to launch things from the lunar surface than it is from either the Martian surface or the Earth surface. So very fascinating. I think space travel or space exploration is exciting. So let's keep our fingers crossed that all of us here are alive long enough to see some of the results of that. And so we are going to do the quickfire 5, and then we're going to move to the Q&A. So if any of you have any questions, now's the time to type them into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Raquel and Eloise will review those and then ask those questions live of Bob, who's now back in his
I just had to go pee. I just couldn't stop. Had to go.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I was told I couldn't do it, but I just had to.
No,
So,
hey man, it's a natural function.
It's nature, yeah.
So,
morning
yeah.
after the coffee. So let me say also, the future,
All right.
a real important future is the asteroid belt. You know, that is going to be really easy to mine because there's no problem with gravity. You just go there and you can come back again. You can pull off, 100-meter chunks of metal and stuff like that, and lots of material. So that, I think that is more important than Mars or the moon, because it's right there,
Now, would you be doing the analysis on the asteroids, or would you be pulling these chunks off and taking them back to the moon for analysis?
Well, the OSIRIS-REx mission done here at the University of Arizona, I'm not part of that, but they sent, and the Japanese have done it too, where they ran out, grabbed a piece of the asteroid, and they're bringing it back, and then they're going to analyze it here on Earth. But, as equipment, NASA really is pushing for the miniaturization of equipment. And as it gets smaller and smaller, more and more work will be done by the robots out there, and they won't need to bring it back to us. Like returning sample, to me, going to Mars and collecting sample and returning it, it's kind of like, yeah, but, it's better, it's easier to analyze it in place than it is to bring it back. It's so difficult to bring it back.
Absolutely.
So that's
Plus, I would imagine that if you analyze it and discover new things and have other questions or other things that you want to explore, if you can do it remotely, then leave the landers there and keep going.
Yes. Like we've even thought on the moon station, what are the astronauts going to do who are there? They're going to be like the most dangerous thing for them to do is to leave the moon station. So even they will be running the robots, and so I don't really, I don't know. We're a ways from being on these planets or other bodies and making a life out of it. It's going to be robots for the most part.
Exciting. All right, Bob, we're going to do our quick fire 5 before Eloise totally passes out on us. These are 5 questions I'm going to ask you. Each question has 2 answers. Your answers are always correct, and you just have to respond which resonates with you strongest, and then we're going to compare to see how the viewers answered. So are you ready for this?
Sure.
Okay. Question number 1. Again, this is your preference. Which answer resonates strongest with you? Margarita or whiskey?
Rye whiskey.
There we go. Number 2, and this may be a tough one. Ramen or udon?
I like the ramen noodles. Udon are too thick, too much dough. Yeah.
Question number 3, mineralogy or mathematics?
Mineralogy.
Mineralogy.
Yeah, I love math, but I like, linear algebra. Man, that is so important. Matrices, vectors, that's the stuff. Make sure you know that. And if you know that, you know how to study the math of crystals.
See, there you go. Kids stay in school.
Yeah.
Question 4, stories or facts? That's a tough one.
While you're having your while you're choosing between margaritas or rye whiskey, I'd go for the stories, I think.
Stories all the time. Okay. Final question, perhaps the toughest. Nike or Olukai?
I know what's behind that. We'll go with the Olukai.
I knew that answer.
Yeah.
All
you
right.
don't have to bend over to put them on. You just put them on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're talking about footwear there.
Eloise, are we ready to look at the answers that our viewers have given us?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Question number 1, margarita or whiskey? Bob passionately went with the rye whiskey. What did our viewers say?
Viewers said in mask whiskey as well. They got it right.
Ooh, nice. Okay. Question number 2, ramen or udon? The choice was ramen. What did our viewers say?
Udon, but really it was pretty much a 50-50 on this one.
I didn't know either. That was just, I thought that might be a funny question to ask. Question number 3, mineralogy or mathematics? Bob went with mineralogy.
Yeah, that was a tough one, but everybody went with mineralogy as well. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Find your love and try to make sure your job in life allows you to do your love. And if you can do both, you are the luckiest person in the world.
Wise words. Wise words.
And so those are my 2 right there, mineralogy and math. They really shouldn't be distinguished.
Yeah. Question number 4, stories or facts? Bob went with stories. What did our viewers say?
We had pretty much a 50-50 with facts, 51%. So it really doesn't count.
All right. And the final question, Nike or Olukai? What did our readers say? Bob went with Olukai.
Pretty much 50-50.
Wow.
But Olukai went like just 1% pass. So yes.
Oh, terrific. And for those who don't know, Olukai is a brand of shoes that's made here in Hawaii. Bob loves to wear them. And I remember one time he proudly took one off and said, "Look what I have." And I'm like, "Oh, bro, you got Olukai. I got all those at home." Yeah. All right, let's switch to our Q&A. And I'm going to repeat Bob's actions. And while the girls are doing the Q&A, I'm going to go hit the restroom.
Okay, Raquel, do you want to take the lead on the Q&A? We had a few questions for Bob.
Yes, Bob, there are a few questions. There was one on the Q&A that Eric De Carlo would answer, but for people that might not be reading the Q&A, the question was about the atmosphere in Mars. If Mars had I'm just going through if it has an atmosphere, how did it lose it? And how do we know that it actually had an atmosphere?
Well, we know it had an atmosphere because it had lakes. And the lakes need an atmosphere to hold them there, or else they would have just evaporated. They'd be the atmosphere and they'd just go away. So there had to be an atmosphere. The planet is pretty rusted. The red planet, it's red because of Fe3+. So primarily Fe2+ in the valence state rusts to Fe3+. And, rust is red. Fe2+ is primarily green. So that's where you get your color from. So that rust has to do with an atmosphere, if you will. Let's see what else.
So why did it lose it?
So, there's a lot of parts to it. For instance, there was no, the magnetism, the electromagnetic field around Mars died at some point. And that's pretty strong around Earth. That holds a lot of the atmosphere in. That was gone on Mars early on. So that allowed it to escape. But Mars has a lower gravity, so the heavier elements like O2 just are too light. They'll be like helium balloons. They'll just float away. CO2, heavier than O2 because it's got a carbon as well, that can stay longer. So that's a heavier molecule, so it stays attracted to the Mars surface better. So the CO2 dominates the atmosphere on Mars now. But even that, it's bleeding off. Even Earth, as Earth circles around the sun, it's bleeding off an atmosphere, a little trail behind it as it goes through space. And so everything loses its atmosphere. It's whether you got something regenerating it and how long it can keep it there. So the regeneration on Mars is basically dead. That's about as good an answer as I could do. I'm not an atmospheric guy.
Now, Bob, you had mentioned that it would be possible to generate a atmosphere on Mars based on the composition of the soil there, but the energy required to do that would be astronomical.
So, yeah, I don't know the exact numbers on Mars, but on Earth is 49% of the atoms on Earth are oxygen that make up the planet. Mars is going to be really similar. Okay. I don't know if it's a little different, but if it's different, it's plus or minus 5% probably. So it's half of the planet is oxygen. So if you could release that, you just got to break up the minerals or the soils, and that would release oxygen. But man, that's a lot of work to release all that oxygen, enough to, our planet, our atmosphere, what do we go up to, about 60 miles up there? That's a lot of volume. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much surface of the planet you'd have to get rid of to get 60 mile, but probably, you probably got to go down hundreds of yards, hundreds of meters, maybe a kilometer of soil just to get 60 miles worth of oxygen. I don't know that ratio. I'm making up those numbers.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thought you have to put. How much are they packed in crystals versus how packed are they in the atmosphere? But it takes a lot of energy to separate all the elements in a crystal.
So moving into, we have one questions related to collections and another one related to instrument. So I'm going to go with the collections. John Watson asked, where did the Dumont collection go?
The Dumont collection? It went to the U of A. Okay. I'm not certain if that's what he means. So Dumont was from Arizona. He went to LA. I believe he was the groundskeeper at a high school or community college or something. I'm not quite up on that, but he loved minerals. He just collected all sorts of things. He loved quartz. My understanding, he was dead before I came onto the scene, so I never met him. But for those that know him, they say he'd go to his house and, he'd have a $40,000 specimen stuck in his microwave, and another thing in his oven was filled with specimens, and the dishwasher, and they were just tucked all over the place. He didn't really have a display, or they weren't cataloged in drawers. They were just scattered around the house. And but Terry Wallace is the person who could tell that story best, I think. Marcus, I know, played a role. Marcus Riglieri. And I think the people at Cristalli played a role as well. But they just convinced him to donate the collection to the U of A, which he did. And that was the single most significant collection to the U of A. It was worth around $7 million when he gifted it. I think that's the answer to the question.
Yes, thank you. There is one more by Jennifer. Actually, Micah Blast. When can we amateurs buy an affordable Raman to identify minerals?
Yeah. There's still a few problems with making it really cheap. My understanding from Bonner Denton, who does a lot of instrument design, is we need the filters. So what you do with Raman is you shine a laser at a material, and that causes the laser has light that vibrate, electric component that vibrates like this, makes the electrons oscillate in your crystal. That causes the atoms to vibrate. and they give off signals. So the signals are not very far away in spectrum space from the laser. And so you have to eliminate the laser signal. And that's really hard to do still. And right now, those filters are like $5,000. So until you can get rid of that, they're still going to be expensive. But in a cell phone, you've already got a detector. It's what you take pictures with. It's a silicon detector. Silicon detector means you'd use a red laser would be a bit of a problem, but the red laser is good because you can make a red laser so red that you can't see it. So it wouldn't be dangerous to point at people. The green laser works really good with that silicon detector, but we have a detector already in a cell phone. I've used a laser pointer, just the red laser that you use in a classroom, and I get a nice Raman signal with that. It's shift. I don't get the part close to the laser. There's too much interference from the laser there, but I can identify a lot of minerals with just that. So a person could build a Raman instrument for a few $1,000 if they really wanted to try, but it wouldn't be the greatest. What you got to do is get close to the laser line, and that's a piece of equipment that's really expensive still. So when that gets solved and make it so it's a nickel, then we're going to see the instrument in a cell phone. I believe some engineers at Georgia Tech successfully have put it into an iPhone and have demonstrated it working. So that was in the news in the last year or so. So it's coming. It's just there's some components that just cost a pile of money. And one of the things with the RRUFF database is that we wanted a model that made that data freely available, because if you get a cell phone, you're not going to pay $1,000 for a database. You need a database that's free. And so we tried to raise our money and spend it in the building of the database, and then make the database available for the public, especially for when it becomes economically viable. I think you can buy a pretty good Raman instrument for maybe $10,000 right now. Yeah.
Wow.
So Bob, along the lines of the RRUFF, we have a question by Jennifer. What's the future of the RRUFF database? You touched a little bit on that by John being running the instrument, and
I got lots. I got 3 or 4 ideas of what to do. One thing is with my involvement with NASA, we were looking to build what we call a planetary materials database. And so we started building the infrastructure for a database. It's called ODR, Open Data Repository. Nate Stone is in charge of that. I have a person working in my lab, Alex Pyers, and we are building this database right now. Hopefully it will be usable by the public before the year is over, and that will change how RRUFF looks completely. And one of the goals is to make it so it can be, what do you call it? What's the word? But make it so everybody else can input data if they want to as well. So it won't just be us. So it'll be a shared thing. So you'll have the ability to make an account, post your data. It'll be search. It can be part of the search match procedures. And I get maybe 2 or 3 requests a week of people saying, here's my data, will you put it up for me? And it just takes so much time for me I don't like doing that too much. And we got to make it so you guys can do it. So the future is that it will be a shared database with what I hope a NASA built infrastructure. Shauna Morrison at my former grad student who's at Carnegie now as a staff member, she's looking for some way to manage the data so that they can really parlay it into the big data projects that they have, that NASA is moving towards, NSF is moving towards, like part of Earth Chem and stuff like that. And so she might be able to look after the logistics of looking after all the data. Alan Norville with the Mineral Museum would like to keep the research component going, integrate it with the GEM, so create a dedicated lab associated with the Mineral Museum. And that's still being worked out. So there's components. So we're going to see something different a year from now. But what I hope we see is that there's a lot more involvement by other labs in posting their data and making it part of the community.
Well, would that create...
One more thing.
Yeah,
Can I say one more? Just one last bit. And part of that is that we're talking a lot with the journals. So AGU has approached us to be the repository for their data. And from that, I've got relationships with the European mineralogical societies, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Russian, the French, the Italian, Canadian, American, and they've all really bought into the RRUFF Project and the sharing of information. And I see a future where all the data from all those papers can be put into a single repository where you don't have to go to each of their websites to find the data. You'll be able to search in one thing and find all the data with interactive software that works. So let me say this about it as well. We're trying to interact so that there are apps that you can build into the data structure. So our first model was diffraction because of Mars. So we have a Rietveld refinement for those who understand Rietveld. That's how to analyze powder diffraction patterns of mixed compounds, soils, and so on, and figure out what the components are. So we've got that built in. It works. And we'll see that with RRUFF and so on, that you'll be able to post data and interact with all the stuff with all sorts of whatever apps you can think of developing. There will be a database of apps, and they'll be associated with the different fields. So there'll be Mossbauer databases and infrared and all sorts of stuff like that. That to me is the future that when I walk away from that, I'll be really happy.
Yeah.
Not that I'm walking away, but that I left something. Yeah.
You already have. My question there was like, once you start opening that to the public, would there be some kind of filtering of?
Yeah.
Because we know how sensitive these instruments are. Yes. So my Raman using just even the same day, I could have a slightly different pattern if the weather conditions are different. So yes. That's the risky part when you come from paper, sure. But if you open to the public and just say, here is my Raman from today.
Yeah.
Where do you see the hiccups in there? Yeah,
there are all sorts, and we haven't really. So when we first start, there'll be somebody who's monitoring. Okay. Yeah. So people will upload and they'll take a look. But we're trying to build it. So for instance, if you upload a Raman spectrum, one of the first things that's going to happen in the background is we're going to check it against the entire data. Yeah. And so if you're up there and you're saying, this is amblygonite, and our search says, no, it's quartz, there'll be something popping up saying there's something weird going on here. We've thought about putting in the thumbs up kind of thing where people go, yes, yes, yes. And so you can get star ratings and you kind of go, yeah, we like using this data set. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to do that, but I think in the end, it's going to be machine learning that's going to dictate the quality control. First level, there'll be a manager. Right now, the person looking after a lot of that stuff is Barbara LaFuente, who's at SETI. And so Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence is actually doing serious NASA science work, and she's managing the databases and their content. And so I think things are going to start there, and then we'll see it evolve. But it's not going to happen in a month. It's going to take a year or two. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Brian. I don't know. We are already 40 minutes after the hour, so
Okay,
maybe
great.
we need to wrap up.
I gotta pee
All right.
again.
And I think that's going to tie it all up. Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show. Fantastic talk. It's always good hanging out with you and chatting. Really enjoyed that.
I like telling those stories. Thank you for letting me.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Right.
For the rest of you
Bob.
watching,
I just wanted to say thank you to Bob Hazen as well, who managed to convince Bob Downs to be on the show today. So big shout out to Bob Hazen. Thanks.
Yeah, you had a lot to do with it too. You've made it sound easy. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Terrific. Bye. Okay, so for all of our viewers out there, make sure to tune back in. First Wednesday of the month. We're going to have another great interview next month rather. And remember, Bob was talking about how donations really kind of kick the whole U of A Mineral Museum forward. If you have a collection or you're looking to do something with the museum, get in touch with us. info@mineraltalkslive.com. Eloise and Raquel are both on the SMMP board. Eloise is the current president, so they can absolutely help to connect you with a museum that can really take advantage of what you have to offer. So from all of us here at Mineral Talks Live, have a fantastic month. Have a great April. We'll see you next month. Take care.